Just After Sunset, Stephen King Revisited. All right, I'll read the introduction here, and then as we go through, I'll explain a little more about what we're going to do, and then that'll be it for stream today. The plan is to reread all of Stephen King's works in the order that they were published. Richard Chizmar of Cemetery Dance had the vision. I'm doing it because I'm a writer and I want to improve my fiction. I love Stephen King's stories. I think there is something to be learned through this process. You can also go back to the beginning and read Before Carrie or any of my other posts through this one and beyond by checking out this link to the master list of all my Stephen King Revisited posts. I'll go ahead and share the link to this article, and then you can get to all the other links there if anybody's interested. All right, there we go. All right, the plan is to, okay, I've already read that. Don't want to go back through. Just After Sunset is dedicated for Heidi Pittler, who was connected to Best American Short Stories. So Just After Midnight, good Lord. Just After Sunset is a short story collection by Stephen King. It came out earlier in the 21st century, I guess you'd say. I think it was around 2008, 2010, in that range. He had kind of gone through a phase of getting away from short stories, and this was sort of his return. I'll go ahead and read that and then talk about some of the stories more as we go through. In the introduction of this short story collection, Stephen King expressed that short story writing is a diminishing skill. Unlike riding a bike, he sees writing broadly and short story writing in particular in the category of flying a plane, playing an instrument, or how some preachers view studying scripture. The longer you go without using it, the more your proficiency with it degrades to the point of forgetting how. Stephen King believes this happened to him as he focused on novel writing for a couple decades leading up to this 2008 collection. It was being a guest editor for Best American Short Stories one year that he credits with reawakening his love for the form of short story writing. This collection represents the stories that followed that returned practice to short story writing. After rereading this collection, I enjoyed every story. I think after revisiting it, I might actually rank it lower than other collections he's done. Even with me lowering it, quote unquote, in rankings following this revisit, I think the stories are good and entertaining. I would recommend this short story collection to anybody, I think. First story was Willa. This is the first story he wrote after his dry spell ended. He says he sees it as less than perfect, but he loves it because it represents the return of short story writing for him. There is a belief expressed here that moving on is confusing, and not everyone can accept that life as they knew it is over. The story shows the difficulty of convincing someone of what they don't want to see, no matter the condition of their spirit. It's a lovely little story about being haunted by perceptions and expectations. I think I like it a little more than Stephen King likes it himself. The Gingerbread Girl, this is a good one. This story may be one that stands out most clearly in my mind. Others come back to me once I start reading them again. But I pretty much remember this one very clearly from beginning to end, right from the beginning. We find ourselves on Vermilion Key instead of Duma Key. Stephen King spent a ton of time in Florida, so more than a few of his stories migrated there from Maine. A heron shows up in this story in Duma Key. The bird was a bad omen, to say the least. Running is the theme, and she is running away from grief before she is running from anything else. It's a great, surprising survival tale. I knew what was coming this time, but when I didn't the first time, the reveal after the build-up was jarring. Someone is wearing a Save the Cheerleader t-shirt, a reference from the television show Heroes that places this story firmly in its year. Harvey's Dream is next. This one's a little strange. In the author notes at the end of the collection, King says this story and one other came to him in a dream. It was more dream dictation than it was writing, he says. It reads like a dream, and the title character is retelling his dream in the story. I do think the story is a little odd and maybe not as strong as it could be as a result of just being transcribed from a dream. We have late middle-age resentment in this marriage. You always know your own is a favorite phrase of King. It's always found around phone calls and bad news. Feels a little like a rehash of a story he's already told in a screenplay that appeared in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. That short story collection's a little flawed too, and a little haphazard as well. For a long time, that was one of my favorites of his. The appeal of this story is that an ordinary dream with ordinary details is made terrifying in its otherwise seemingly ordinary retelling, skillfully done. The Sopranos TV show is referenced. One of the characters works at a video store. Remember when video stores were still a thing. Rest Stop is another great story. This is a great compact tale with good cathartic violence. It's a great piece of mild, realistic revenge fantasy. One of my favorite stories in the collection, and one that has stuck with me since the first reading. The writer character in the story thinks that Russians are out as villains. It's funny how things come back in style. So the writer character in the story writes thrillers under a pen name, and he's trying to find villains for a story other than Russians, because Russians don't make good villains anymore. Of course, we've kind of come full circle, and now the Russians are the villains again sometimes. All right, Stationary Bike. This story was set the summer after the 9/11 attacks. That is a more direct time reference in another story later in the collection. I'm curious if these stories were written during those times or were referenced back to them at a later date. King goes on a long rant through a doctor character of his distaste for fat people. It is an ongoing theme in his work over the decades. In the past, he's demonstrated that not to have a clear grasp on what actual weights are overweight. It might be a phobia of his that's boiled under the surface all this time. He leans into the mind of the artist, as he did with Duma Key. I'm curious whether this story was written before, after, or during the writing of that novel. Grief has been the primary motivation for exercise for Stephen King's characters for a while. Stephen King's characters always say pictures instead of pictures. I'm reading Under the Dome right now, and another character exercises because they're trying to get rid of grief. So that's an ongoing theme for Stephen King. The narrator references the ending everyone expects as the story tries to subvert that expectation a little. The story wrestles with the balance between obsession and moderation. All right, the next story in the collection is The Things They Left Behind. This is Stephen King's 9/11 story, the September 11th terror attacks, and it is a good one. It is restrained and ends in a solid place. The Dixie Chicks are referenced, and I wondered if this was written in the time period when it is set, or if this cultural reference was put in when the story was written later to affirm the time period. Graduation Afternoon. This is another one that came from a dream image. I thought it was missing something when I first read it years ago, but I like this story much better on the second read now. Jay-Z, Beyonce, and The Fray are referenced. This is a great story, maybe the strongest one I'm about to just repeat what I said here. This may arguably be the strongest story in the collection, a centerpiece. I like it a great deal, but I thought I could also list off more than half the stories in this that I like a great deal. I'm not sure I could pinpoint this one as my favorite, which I think speaks to the overall strength of the collection. The description of finding and escaping the field is tense and scary. The passing of the curse adds to a well-formed horror. I believe he fully achieved what he was trying to invoke in this tale. All right, The Cat from Hell. This is the oldest story in the collection, dating back to the 1970s, some 30 years before publication at the time. I know a couple people who have strong opinions on this story. It first appeared in the men's magazines back in the day. They just keep taking this cat for a drive, no matter the warning signs against it. The New York Times at bargain basement prices. This story is touching and unnerving. I thought I remembered a different ending. There is a reference to old relatives doing email blasts. I think social media has become the outlet for that, thank goodness. Mute, another story, driving to Derry and picking up a hitchhiker. What could possibly go wrong? Stephen King sets up an interesting dilemma around the question of, is this a sin, and what type of sin? Ayana, in more than one story, King has described the smell of old people as a yellow smell. We have a magic black child in this one. King literally references the girl by that descriptor. The medical definition of a miracle is misdiagnosis. That's a good line. And then lastly, a very strong ending story, a very tight place. I remember this one well. It is gross out horror at its least apologetic. The ending, though fitting, may not be as satisfying as some readers would like. My next post in this series will be Before Under the Dome, which will be linked on the master list of all my Stephen King Revisited posts.